Good evening all, welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers update tonight, the 14th of January 2014. My name is Chris Nitzo, and tonight we'll be talking about two tropical lows, the first that is east or southeast of Darwin, and the second which will develop in the northeast Coral Sea. The latest track map issued at 8:15 tonight Queensland time. We see that the low pressure system is now to the southeast of Darwin, basically just to the east of Adelaide River. It is moving in a south to southwesterly direction. At this point in time, the model guidance is getting a little clearer on wanting to keep it inland of the coast, so therefore it is limited in its potential to develop into a TC. However, it will only need a couple of hours, and that's why with this sort of grey error margin here, you can see right in this area here, we have that grey error margin. So if it does pop off the coast there for a couple of hours, there is a chance that it might just form into a borderline tropical cyclone, category 1 level, not expecting anything more significant than that. Regardless of whether it does or doesn't, it's backed by a fairly strong monsoon trough, and so what happens once the system is south of you, you should be on an onshore northwesterly wind feed into the system, and so therefore you're going to see some heavy rain on that coastal strip. Then the further the low pushes inland, the more chance that rain has of getting a little bit further inland and not just being extremely coastal. Now, in the longer term, the interesting part of this is that the system will finally, towards about day 2 to 3, start to adopt a westerly track, and we'll talk about the longer term impacts of that westerly track very shortly. So if we take a look at the last 12 hours of radar animations in this region, we can see that the system has basically tracked in a southerly direction, almost no southwesterly motion to it at all, and so therefore it's passed well inland of Darwin itself, and so we're seeing the system now at the end of this animation right around here to the southeast of the Adelaide River region, and continuing to push in a south to southwest direction in this sort of area. So we're looking at the system remaining fairly well inland. Unless it gets a shove now to the west, we really shouldn't see that system making the coastline, but stranger things have happened, and the coastline is orientated more north-south in this area, so it just needs to adopt a slightly more westerly trajectory, and there is just the chance that the system can push offshore, and so that's why I guess the Bureau have to keep that warning going. Looking at the satellite animation over Australia, you can see the signature, the satellite signature of this system has developed nicely over the last 24 hours, and really I guess the big limiting factor is now the fact that it's over land. If it can get over water, the conditions atmospherically aren't too bad for it to deepen reasonably quickly, but behind it you can see a fairly strong monsoon. You can see a lot of cloud and rain activity, especially in this southwestern Gulf area where we've got this northeast-east convergence, just really smashing that southwestern Gulf and creating a lot of rainfall in that region. Unfortunately, there's not too many rain gauges, so we don't really know how much rain, but I can tell you those totals will be sizable in that area, as in well and truly over 100 millimetres. If we go further east, we see some higher cloud of that storm activity streaming across the northern half of Queensland. No rain in it though. It's just more of keeping temperatures nice and comfortable. Further north, we do see some convergent areas in the northern parts of the Cape York Peninsula, and then continuing eastwards, we are starting to see some development of this cloud mass here over the Solomon Islands. We'll talk about that at the end of our broadcast, in the second half of our broadcast. Alright, let's have a look at the NT low, and let's have a look at where it's going to go. Well, the UK Met model, as I've been saying for the last couple of days, has done reasonably well, except for one run where it decided to develop a Category 2 or 3 TC out here. Overall, it's done very well with this particular system from the word go. And we can see here that the system continues to track in that south to southwesterly direction until about the 17th of January. Now, on the 17th of January, what we do is we have a building high pressure ridge coming in underneath the system, and so that high pressure ridge will block it from pushing further to the south. That block, not only will it just block it, it will actually deflect it and push it out to the west, possibly even a slight west-northwest direction, but more than likely just due west. Now, assuming that happens, we should see the system getting very close to the Pilbara coastline in the East Pilbara, around that Port Hedland region, between Broome and Port Hedland. Now, whether it makes it off the coast, the models are not willing to go that extra step and push it actually offshore. Now, probably one of the reasons there is the fact that the ridge sort of pushes a little bit further to the east, and also the fact that the coastline is really orientated in a west to east direction here. It's not really orientated in this way. It's orientated more in that west to east direction. So the system will have to continue to push due west for an extended period to make it offshore. At this stage, models aren't willing to do that. They're willing to just get it to the coast. And look, really though, if it can just make it get its sort of toes wet in the water here, it will form into a TC. It's just a matter of, can it do it? Can it go that extra 100 k's and get offshore? Or will it just remain a coastal system or a coastal hugger? Now, look, in both scenarios, you're going to see a lot of rainfall in the Pilbara, probably the East Pilbara particularly, and then the Kimberley coastline as well. The Kimberley coastline will see a lot of rain because they're on that northern side in that northwesterly monsoonal flow. So this is going to be a fairly big rain producer across the northern half of WA. Fingers crossed it comes off, but at this stage it's looking very positive on all model guidance. So here's a look at the GFS, just to show you I'm not lying. There is very good agreement between a lot of the model guidance. We can see that southerly push, and then we see just a very big shift to the west. A little bit later on the GFS, late in the 17th, early in the 18th of January, we see that shift directly west and then hugging the coast between Port Hedland and Karratha or Onslow, just hugging the coast. And once again, it's just so touch and go whether the system can dip its feet into the water and actually reform into it or form into a TC. Once again, the GFS in the short term though keeps the system inland, gets it close to the coast but overall inland, and therefore not expecting it to form into a tropical cyclone. But it does intensify it as it pushes it right along the coast in the Pilbara around the 21st of January. Very similar story with the NavGem model, just keeps it just inland of the coast and then continues pushing it in a southerly direction until about the late on the 16th, and then pushes it due west and hugs the coast all the way through to Exmouth by the 20th. It probably is a little bit optimistic, this model, in the speed of movement of the system. I don't think it's going to move quite that rapidly, but it is very similar guidance that we've got from every model so far. The Bureau of Meteorology's Access Global Model, thanks to Weather Zone for the graphics here, you can see that the low pressure region lies here in the inland East Kimberley on the Thursday morning. On the Friday morning, pushes in a southwest direction. This is the 17th. This is about the time where we expect that more due west motion with the building ridge underneath it, and that's what you get on the 18th, 19th, and 20th. It gets so close to the coast. Now look at these rainfalls on the eastern edge of it. So anywhere sort of even Derby southwards is going to see some very heavy rainfall. But still, that rainfall, the really heavy stuff, is all to the east of the tropical low or cyclone all the way through. Now the Access G model does not push this offshore and therefore keeps it a very strong monsoonal low, and we're still seeing massive rainfalls inland and massive rainfalls on the coastline. So we could be talking cumulative falls of 200 to 400 millimeters in parts. So it is really intense rain for that part of the world. Okay, last couple of minutes on this particular system. We're going to take a look at the higher res model imagery of what the winds are going to do. In particular, we want to focus on the more populated regions, so areas like Darwin, looking at 15 to 20 knot winds tonight, maybe even getting up to 25 knots at times as the system continues to track southwards. We see that the rainfall expected overnight tonight, we are going to see some very heavy rainfall right on that coastal fringe and in the vicinity of the low, and that's what we're seeing on radar right now. We're also seeing some very heavy rainfall on the southwestern Gulf, as I showed you at the start of the broadcast. So we're seeing that for the next at least the next 6 hours. As we head to 9:30 tomorrow, we see the low pressure system just inland of the coast. Now remember, this is the area of doubt. If the model is slightly off here, the system gets on the water and can reform very quickly in maybe 6 to 12 hours. That's all it would take to get this system into a TC if it can get itself over water. But at this stage, the model guidance suggests no. And in Darwin, at that tomorrow morning, we're still seeing those 15 to 20, maybe 25 knot winds, and we're still seeing some pretty heavy rain in the area, although not as heavy as it will be tonight. By tomorrow afternoon, the threat of this system becoming a TC starts to diminish, and tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. the system lies basically on the NTWA border. And if we look at once again the rainfall expected in the region, we have some very moderate to heavy falls in the western top end coast. Darwin's probably the northern extent of it, and it's really getting very heavy around Columbaroo and that particular region there. On the southwestern Gulf, we just this is relentless, folks. This rain in the southwestern Gulf just won't stop. It's just crazy the amount of rain that's happening over there in the next 24 to 48 hours. 10 p.m. tomorrow night, we have the system here lying in basically the just to the west of the border. And once again, Darwin, 15 to 20 knot winds. That monsoon is reasonably strong in behind it, so don't be surprised if winds are fresh and gusty for a while yet. And in terms of rainfall, though, the heavier rain is now south of the city and really right around the centre of the system. Shifting our focus now to the Kimberley Pilbara region, we continue to track this system through to Thursday morning. You can see it's still got gales. It's really strange. It's actually got stronger winds now on Thursday than it does as it was closer to the coast. The reason being is because of that developing ridge to the south of it, we're going to see a pressure gradient squeeze, and the system continues to track in a south-southwest direction through Thursday. But then on Friday, this is Friday 10 a.m., we start to see the system adopt a more westerly track, and that's because of that ridge building underneath it, and it really starts to push west reasonably quickly there on the Friday and then into Saturday. By Saturday, we're starting to go, oh, it's getting close to land. So that's around the time where we start to really pay attention to this system, because if it can make it off that coastal fringe, it can form into a TC again. At this stage, most of the guidance suggests it's going to be just inland of that. But look at these winds here, folks. It's 25 to 30 knots onshore winds, 25 to 30 knots to the south. That's not going to take much to get those into gale force if the system can make it offshore. So as I say, it's only going to take 12 hours or so, only going to take 100 k's or so off the coast, and this thing could be named. And you can see here gale force winds on the Sunday offshore. The system remains inland here south of Port Hedland. But it's got very strong winds around it, so it's going to have fairly good structure, so it's not going to take very long if the system can get offshore. Now, in saying that, though, we don't, at this stage, as I say, the model guidance does keep it inland and then pushes it through the Gascoyne region. Now, bearing in mind that the rainfall here will be phenomenal if it adopts this track and the monsoon is nice and strong in behind it, you're going to see some really high rainfalls, and we've already explained that here between the Derby region and all the way south and possibly as far west as Karratha. Alright, that's where we're leaving the NT stuff. Let's get into the Queensland stuff. The Queensland stuff is about to go off. Northern Coral Sea going to see a low. The low is going to develop further. However, not expected to hit the coast. It's expected to remain well offshore of the Queensland coast. Wednesday, very low potential, obviously, but Thursday, Friday, that potential increases to around the 20 to 50% mark of this system becoming a TC. We'll have a look at these two models that have been getting this right so far for Queensland, and the first model is the UK Met, and we can see the system forms very shortly. In fact, it's actually formed now, and we see the system pushing in an almost due south direction, possibly slightly south-southeast. There is a hint there on the 16th that it pushes a little bit towards the Queensland coast, but overall it's just pushing almost parallel but a little closer, because remembering, once again, we always stress this, the Queensland coast doesn't run north-south. The Queensland coast runs in that direction, which is northwest to southeast direction. So even though the system travels in almost a due south direction, it actually gets closer to the Queensland coast as it heads towards the further south that it goes. So as we head towards the southern Coral Sea, you see that the actual distance between the system and the actual Queensland coast is a lot smaller than the distance, say, between Cairns and the system. Alright, so even though the system hasn't technically moved towards the coast, it is inadvertently getting closer to the coast. At this stage, the model guidance from the UK does suggest that this will be a tropical cyclone. It suggests that it's probably only going to be a marginal type system, Cat 1, possibly Cat 2, but at this stage it looks like it's going to get into an extratropical transition, or what we call when a cyclone goes from being tropical and heat driven to more temperature driven in the upper levels of the atmosphere later on in the forecast. As it heads towards the southeast, southern Coral Sea, we're going to see that transition take place. There is a fair chance, though, that as that transition takes place, that the system will maintain a certain element of gales around its centre, just because that extratropical transition sometimes can result in just some strengthening, or at least maintenance of the actual circulation strength. What does that look like in a little bit higher resolution? We can see that the system is located in the Solomon Sea tonight. As it pushes tomorrow, we'll start to see the system just a hint of perhaps a bit of tightening up here, as opposed to a trophy low. It actually forms into a circulation. Then as we head towards Wednesday night, it sort of starts to drift in a southerly direction. You can see here there's gales, but a long way south of the system. It can't be a tropical cyclone unless those gales start to wrap around the centre. And as we head to Thursday morning, we see the system continuing to track in a southerly direction. Not really more towards the coast. It's more due south at about 158 east. And we see gales still around the southern semicircle, but a long way removed from the actual centre of the system. It's also got a fairly decent monsoonal fetch, and we're seeing some excellent convergence on the east side, but nothing really to the west. So all the rainfall of this system will be on the eastern semicircle and possibly the southern semicircle in that convergent flow. As we head towards Thursday night, we see the system continues on its merry way to the south, a long way offshore, so don't stress, Queenslanders. It's a long way away. It will start to, probably by Friday or Saturday, increase the swells along the southeast Queensland coast. We are starting to see gales there by Friday morning, and those gales are starting to get a lot closer to the system's core. So there is a chance there on Friday that the system will be named ATC. But once again, no significant strengthening of that as we head through the time frame. You can see here there are gales, but the system is a marginal. If it becomes one, it will be a marginal TC as it heads to the south. As we head towards Saturday morning, we continue to see the southerly track here around the 160 degree east mark. There's Brisbane there, so you can see a long way away. So I'm not sure if I haven't watched any media tonight to see if they've been hyping this up, but at worst it's going to be a fairly weak TC. At best it's going to remain a tropical low. This is around about the time here on Saturday and Sunday that we start to see some extra tropical transition taking place. In the over Queensland, we have a very strong upper level trough. That upper level trough will seek to change the structure of the tropical cyclone or the tropical low into an extratropical cyclone, or a subtropical low, if you like. And so it'll lose its tropical characteristics probably around Sunday. And then once it undergoes that transition, it starts to weaken out on the Sunday and really starts to elongate into a more trough type system. Alright, so that's the Queensland one, folks, and that's what we're expecting from that. At this stage, doesn't look like it's going to give us too many surprises. There is a chance there that it'll push more in a south to southwest direction once it loses all form. That's just because there's a ridge underneath it, and it may push the remnant circulation in the lower levels a little bit to the west. But overall, everyone, that's all she wrote for the Queensland one. Remembering, obviously, Coral Sea can be unpredictable, so we do need to keep track of that, and we will keep you up to date over the next couple of days with it. But at this stage, we don't expect too many surprises. Remembering, the Coral Sea, once again, always a caveat, is the most unpredictable basin we've seen in the world. So The other thing we need to talk about is just a tropical low probably forming or possibly forming in the Gulf of Carpentaria in early next week, early to middle of next week. And here it is on Tuesday night. We see the system very weak, but it does have a decent monsoonal flow, and it will have a weak sort of southeasterly flow into it as well. So it does need to be monitored just for the potential of a tropical low forming in that area. At this stage, the most likely movement of a tropical low that does form in the Western Gulf will be over to NT, as if they haven't had enough rain already. Poor old Queensland at this stage, it is looking like they may miss out even if this tropical low does form. So nothing on the horizon big time for Queensland just yet. In fact, the worst thing for Queensland is this tropical low or cyclone that'll form in the East Coral Sea, because if it stays offshore, it's going to take a lot of the moisture away from the coast of Queensland and a lot of the moisture away from inland Queensland, so we're not going to see very heavy rainfall there at all over the next week. So the next 4 days, folks, of rain, a lot of rain on the western top end, and that'll start pushing into the Kimberley region of WA, and we will see that rain also extending a long way inland into central parts of the Northern Territory. We'll see that amazing amount of rain over the southwest Gulf. Look at that, 400 millimetres. That's crazy rainfall for that region. Amazing. Anyway, over to Queensland, we have a little bit of shower activity along the coastline, being enhanced in the wet tropics coastline, and also a fairly decent convergence up here in the northern Cape York Peninsula associated with the monsoon trough, so seeing some heavier rainfall totals up there. From the 18th to the 21st, we're going to continue to see heavy rainfall over the western top end. Once that monsoon kicks in, folks, it just keeps bringing moisture in from the Timor Sea, and so you're going to get these these moist winds that are just going to keep streaming in moisture into the region. So you're going to see massive falls here on the western coast. Whether they hit Darwin or not, well, who knows? But if you get under one of those monsoonal surges or squall lines, you're going to see quick 50 millimetres out of it, and you might get a couple of those a day. So looking further afield here over WA, we see that low or cyclone is now over here near the Pilbara coastline, and so we're starting to see good rainfalls all along the Kimberley and the east and central Pilbara coastline. There is some guidance that suggests the low gets around Exmouth, and so therefore if that happens, that rain will extend westwards. But remember, this is the 4 to 8 day period. The tropical low over the Coral Sea will seek to make everything dry from Cairns southwards over Queensland. A lot of dry air pushing and circulating through the area, so that time between 18th to the 21st is not going to be a happy time for rainfall anywhere over the northern, central and southern parts of Queensland. The far north part of Queensland, though, look at this monsoon smashing the western peninsula and giving places like Weipa a hammering, a drenching, which is great news for them. And look, at this stage, possibly even extending even to the southeast Gulf, which has missed out on most of the rainfall all season so far. So that would be a godsend for them if they could get a couple of hundred mils in the next in the 4 to 8 day period. Also, that monsoon trough remains firmly in place here over the northern peninsula, so you're going to see good convergence over this region as well. Although anywhere south of Cairns, that dry air really seeps in, so not too much happening in that time period. Alright folks, thanks very much for watching. Tomorrow night we'll be having a look at what's going on with both of these things again. Talk to you then. Good night.